With the recent conclusion of Rewrite, which in all of its entirety I still think is just an average show, something interesting has occurred, and this is something that has always been around, but something that I never really expected to have actually dragged itself back to relevancy. Visual novel adaptations have always been around in the anime industry, and although we don't usually get a whole season of them, they are still being made enough that we can at least expect one or two of them in any given season. To get into the logistics of a visual novel versus manga adaptation is digging a really deep rabbit hole. Both inevitably have their own merits, and of course they also have their flaws. But to get into that really isn't the point. I don't want to compare the two per se, but I do want to explore what a visual novel adaptation really means. To paraphrase, a visual novel is basically a playable novel. You get visuals and music and maybe some choices that become the backdrop of a conventional novel. The appeal of a visual novel then becomes this idea of watching a book or playing a book. In most cases, and as with most things in this industry, visual novels tend to roll down the road of eroge, and as thus I think has garnered this stigmatic impression of it on the community. In other words, it's hard to talk about visual novels without someone immediately thinking about an H game. That just isn't true to what visual novel is. A visual novel should be thought of as simply that, a visual novel, not an H game. So where does this play into anime? Well, visual novel adaptations in anime aren't tied down to this impressionistic idea of eroticism. In fact, I believe visual novel adaptations in anime are quite endeared. But here's the thing when you try and adapt a game, and let's not forget the fact that a visual novel is still in essence a game. You can't replicate the same feeling you get when you play it. That's why I think game adaptations are really hard to do, simply because you need to capture what players feel and what's core to the game to actually make it faithful. But there's the problem. Players play games their own way, and so you can't really get a universal feeling for games, you just have to guess or take popular opinion. But even then, that doesn't include everyone, and that barrier to entry is something that I think pervades visual novel adaptations. When you watch a visual novel adaptation, I think you can really feel that it's an adaptation. You get this weird kind of continuity between scenes and dialogue that just simply makes no sense in animation, but when you read it at your own pace, it feels fine. It's this strange dissonance and uncanny valley that at first made me feel apprehensive about Rewrite. It just rubbed me the wrong way, and it still does, but that's the kind of feel you get from a visual novel adaptation. Apart from that strange sense of dialogue enter dialogue, another problem with visual novel adaptation is pacing. And before we talk about Rewrite's decisions, I want to bring this up in a general sense. How do you pace a 50-hour-long game into 4 hours of anime? How do you even come to grasp what cutting 50 hours of gameplay, which in the visual novel's case is pure narrative drivel, into a watchable experience? Any studio brave enough to do that, I give them all my respect, because that is a territory that is just riddled with mines. And when you think of it in that scope, you begin to start realizing that a visual novel adaptation of a single core, or even over a few cores, still wouldn't be enough. Clannad, the pinnacle of visual novel adaptations, has over 50 episodes, and that in of itself is still probably not all of which Clannad, the visual novel, will offer. So much content has to be cut, and yes, there is a clear solution to all of this convolution. Pick a single route. I think that's the easiest way for anyone to ever adapt a visual novel. If you chunk out a visual novel to a single route, then condensing a visual novel doesn't seem that bad. You just outright ignore most of all that makes a non-kinetic visual novel great. Story choice, branching paths, moral breakdowns. Well, okay, you can add that sense of branching paths to an anime, and I'm not saying having that kind of mental choice of decision cannot be replicated, but it just doesn't feel that organic once you realize you're watching a visual novel adaptation. I kind of have a different mindset going into visual novel adaptations that prevent me from enjoying it without constantly comparing it to a visual novel, to trying to guess which point in the plot could be progressed with different options and watching for all the cliches. It honestly becomes a hassle for me in recent visual novel adaptations because of this notion that no matter what, everything just feels like it could be longer, and it could have more depth if I just played it. And certainly if I just played it, then the outcome of the anime wouldn't feel kind of rushed or forced, and it would feel natural. I would make decisions that I would make in real life and not have to disagree with what the protagonist is doing. Simply put, I can make a visual novel story my own simply because I have player input, but an adaptation throws all that out the window. If you don't like the route taken, too bad. If you don't like his decisions because he played the visual novel and did something different, too bad. If it's rushed, too bad. But I'm just beating around a dead horse. Let's talk about Rewrite. Rewrite ended on a really strange note. I don't care about spoiling Rewrite because honestly, who the hell even knows what's going on anyway? So, at the end of Rewrite, the whole world ends, and that to me is a pretty satisfying ending. They literally took the abomination that they made and destroyed it. No redeeming qualities whatsoever, just kill it with fire, or trees in this case. So yeah, good old Rewrite ended, and what do we have here? They're adapting another route. Okay, so that's the other thing that studios can do, retcon an entire new route into a new season and try to squeeze as much out of this franchise as possible. Is this necessarily wrong? Well, if they want to be faithful, they can do that, go ahead. But if they do it in the same manner which made the first season horrid anyway, then what's the point? Let's look at our case study, Clannad. Clannad has a definite route, and the route chosen is not intrusive at all. Why? 50 episodes. They milked the most out of all the intricacies of all the characters, played around with the idea of different routes in non-intrusive OVAs, and finally ended the story on a note that felt complete, despite how incomplete making it a slice of life was. But even they couldn't help but throw some ambitious ending at the end of Afterstory, which was very intrusive and threw me completely out of the loop and made me come back to the realization that this was indeed a visual novel adaptation. I mean, I grew to like it sometime in the middle of it, when it just became a weird little slice of life anime rather than an adaptation. I even allowed it to bring me through the Nagisa route, knowing full well that I was being brought along through all the choices, and then they just had to make a weird ending. But at least they did have a conclusive ending that they stand by. Well, not so conclusive, but still. They aren't making a full season for these other girls that are here. They've accepted the route they took and they live by it. Even the rest of these visual novel adaptations are making their routes and sticking to it, no matter what the backlash. They've committed to the job and now they can move on, but apparently 8-bit studios have decided otherwise. Actually, who are these guys? Okay, Infinite Shadows first season, second season, 3 different OVAs, Macross movies, Chronicles of Senjuko Hara and Friends. Wait, this isn't their first visual novel adaptation. I'm going to assume that with the second season, since it says that it begins right at the end of the first season, that Grisaya took the Clannad approach to not just put an entire full stop to the story and leave some of it later. But with Rewrite, they decided to rush an extremely weird ending, and then push it off by saying that it was all to make another season with a different route. An interesting choice to say the least. Especially because you're dealing with key adaptation, a very sacred place in many of our hearts. But hey, I'm going to watch the second season and see what's up, because it might be interesting to see what they're going to do. I don't have any plans to play the visual novel, so I'll take it for what it is, if not because I felt cheated. But okay, I think to put a definite answer on this topic is to agree that visual novel adaptations are just damn hard to do. You have problems with trying to cater to an audience that may have played the game, trying to make cliches of these visual novels not so egregious, and you have to deal with a schedule that may only permit you a certain amount of episodes to fit in tens of hours of gameplay in 4 hours. It's a lot of work on any studio's hands, and hey, ever since Clannad, it's kind of hard to go into this territory considering how well done Clannad was. Is 8-bit Studios' decision on Rewrite going to be their solution to the visual novel adaptation problems? Well, we'll see. Though the show still sucks.